for coming, and thank you for being here. I was watching today the videos from Kyiv, where police was trying to shoot down the Iranian drones bombing the city. And I was thinking that it's a bit surreal that we are sitting here in the conference hall while such dramatic and tragic things are happening over there in Ukraine, cities of Zaporizhia, of Mykolaiv. They are being almost constantly bombed, but this is the reality, as I understand. Maybe Sophia can tell you a bit more. This is also the reality of Ukraine now. The show is going on. People are attending their families, their works, but on the other hand, you may have to run away from the Iranian drone or any other Russian missile. And hear me? Oh, I guess this is the way it is. We have to be here also to understand the situation better and somehow inspire and mobilize ourselves better. So I will have pleasure to be moderating the debate with Sofia Olinek, which is a coordinator from Kyiv, Ukrainian Kyiv Bureau of Böll Foundation. Laurina Svajc. Sorry, I always get please. Sorry, I'm sorry, I knew it would happen. Is the CEO of Collegium Europy Wschodniej, Collegium of Eastern Europe, and you've met the CEO from Germany of Böll Foundation. Thank you for being here with us. And Laurina, sorry again. And sorry to you. And I thought that since we will be talking about this concept of the voice and the narratives, I've heard it so many times in the months and years from my Ukrainian colleagues, not only that they had the impression that their perspective is not being heard. You know, there's this anecdote of, European journalists from Moscow telling people in Europe what is going on in Kyiv. So I thought that maybe I could start with asking you the question, if you feel that Ukrainian voice is being heard and recognized finally now in Europe.
I think, thank you very much for, does it work?
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. From my perspective, it sounds like that. First of all, thank you so much for inviting and having Ukraine actually in focus on this conference. And the crucial why I think it's essential that we have, for example, like Ukraine in the focus is this, as Joanna said, like to have more Ukrainian voices amplified, because it always feels like there are those like who are beyond speaking about what's happening in Ukraine, and for us, it's both a personal story, but in a way it's also professional duty to say what's happening and what's the reality that we live or that we left the country fleeing because of a war. Because you can leave the country, but the war is following you. You cannot liberate your mind of this, and you have war following you in a way. But what's essential to say is, indeed, I observe that there are more Ukrainian voices and experts currently visible on the stage, but I think it's never enough. It should be more. Because this is the reality. This is what you see in a daily life. And I think when you come to Ukraine and you see what's happening there, the level of destruction, or even just try to live with, between the air raid alarms, or as we observed today, the second Monday in a row, we have like active shelling in Kyiv. I mean, like last week when I was in Kyiv, that was not the most pleasant feeling to wake up with explosions, hearing explosions around the streets. And today we get the messages from our colleagues and friends writing, I hear the explosions and there was shelling somewhere and we are hiding. And of course, like you try to balance how you work, what you do to try to maintain your normal life, along with a regular shelling. And I mean, like right now with those drones attacking from everywhere and having this scale as it's happening, like since yesterday evening, air defense systems destroyed like 47 drones. It's since yesterday evening, like 10 p.m. or something. This is 85% of the drones which were launched, and the rest as we see, hit the civilian infrastructure, hit energy infrastructure, different kind of capacities and institutions. And this should not be like that. And I mean, like, this is, we say that 85% was damaged when we have a limited, like, we have air defense system, air anti-missile systems. But imagine if we would have more of this. Then the people who are right now in Ukraine, they would, we are working regardless of whatever is happening and whatever shelling is happening. But if we would have more defense, probably there would be less strikes and less damages, and we could focus more on what we do. Nevertheless, I mean, like, with all this level of destruction and threat is coming, I mean, we had, what we observed last week discussing, that when on 24th of February, you felt sort of a panic or not knowing what's happening. Last week and this week, you feel anger. You don't feel panic. Because, I mean, you, like, when we discuss with friends, we say, like, yeah, this is, it's hitting, you're afraid of what's happening, but you continue working. I mean, this is the state of affairs that we have for 8 months, and this is not the stage where we can give up. And this is also the kind of a sign that we want to show that this is like, if we are not giving up, I mean, the EU, the world should not give up on us as well, because people keep on working and doing. And also, like, it's essential to, like, we don't ask that someone will come and fight instead of us. We do our jobs. I mean, like, we do what we can. And if you ask our partners, the civil society that we work, everyone would say, like, we work 3 times more than we did before, because everyone is trying to keep their front line as much as possible. And and what we realized also before the war, that this information front line is one of the multiple front lines that we are facing with this war. It's no longer, I mean, if we talk about the war, all in all, it's no longer just a physical front line with shellings from one side to another side. It's, as we see with current war, and also what we try as foundation work with, this is like, we analyze war through the perspective of human security, because this is energy frontline, this is information frontline, economic frontline. These are different aspects of security that we have to assess and talk about when we talk about the war.
So my first actually question to you would be, what is, from your perspective, you would have to choose one, I know we could talk for hours, but what is the most, I don't know, dangerous concept or narrative right now going around Europe, the most dangerous for Ukraine and Europe as whole now?
2, if you allow me. Okay, so first one is it's Putin's war. It's not a Putin's war. It's Russia's war. And like, this is not one-person war. This is way more global. It's the system, it's the silence. This is multifaceted. So let's not call it Putin's war. It's not. It's Russia's war against Ukraine, and it's Russia entering the territory of independent sovereign state. This is one thing. Another thing, it's a local war or regional war that's happening somewhere far away. No, it is not.
Do you still hear it?
I mean, occasionally. So, I mean, like, the further you go, sometimes you hear, oh, this somewhere. Like, I was 3 weeks ago in Athens, and I had a very casual chat, and someone asked me, like, so is the war still happening there in Ukraine? I said, like, yeah, it is. And are you going back? I said, like, yeah, I do go back. And so it's not a local war, first and foremost, because its impact, it has results on every country of the EU, and it has way more influence on different countries. It's, as we see that the migrants coming, we see, and they are not coming because of a good life. They are fleeing the war and shelling. I mean, like, imagine you can't send your kid to the kindergarten because you have air raid alarm, so it stays at home. Or if you send your kids to school, they were spent like 4 hours of the air raid alarm at home. These people are fleeing not because of a good life, because of a danger and threat. So as we see, what I want to say is, what is happening right now in Ukraine, it has an impact, and what is Russia doing in Ukraine, it has an impact on all the neighboring countries. I mean, also, this is quite amazing, like how Poland supported and hosted all the people coming from Ukraine, and on the level of support that we have. And but in the long term, it's energy, it's economic impact. This is not a local war. That's my point.
Why do you think this concept or this perception that it's Putin's war is dangerous or harmful?
I think in a way, you know, to explain that this is just one, if we will get rid of one person, then it will be better times happening. I don't think if we will get rid of one person, it will solve all our problems, because this is like the system is quite rotten. Let's be honest, and also the mentality. I mean, and like the support of the war. I mean, like if you follow some of the Russian media as well, you would see how the narrative is happening there. Like the narrative saying, this is the war, the war of the West against Russia. It's our poor Russians suffering because of the war of the West. I mean, this is quite a complex thing, if we say. And it's not. It's again. It's not just the Putin's war. It's also people who are. There are those who are forced to go to fight, but there are also those who are going and implementing the orders. I mean, the recent UN report saying that the rape was part of war strategy implemented in Ukraine. Rape, and also they were, I'm sorry to mention this, but they were distributing Viagra and also forcing men to rape, no matter a child, a woman, a man. So this is not Putin doing. It's men who are in the front line implementing the orders. Where's the protest? Where are the protests? I mean, of those who leave Russia? Why we have now there is a lot of capacity to talk about, like against Putin's regime, but we don't hear it.
So, Laurinas, I would go to you with the same question, but first, you are also a correspondent for Lithuanian media and television, radio. So first, if you could just maybe compare the Lithuanian stance, position, to Polish position, because both countries are in the avant-garde of supporting Ukraine, but I guess for us to understand better, I would ask you about the differences, where it's coming from, the origins.
Okay, so maybe I'll begin with, thank you very much for the invitation. Hello to everyone. I'll begin with a short reflection. I think when it comes to whatever Lithuania, the Baltic countries do on Poland, it's always nice to hear how the Ukrainians are seeing those things. So from my perspective and the way the Lithuanians see in a way their role being a small country, and I think it's the same for Latvia and Estonia, is that you cannot help Ukraine full out. Our GDP is too small, we can give all our clothes, give whatever we can, but it will not be enough. So for example, here Poland plays a very important logistical role for supporting Ukraine. On the one hand, the humanitarian welcoming Ukrainian refugees or temporarily displaced people. On the other hand, Lithuanians, I think, see themselves as having a mission due to to the little size of the country to actually have a role in distributing the message. So actually, one of the things, giving the narrative, and I think telling and distributing the narrative. So I think it's when you look at the sort of the official line of the Lithuanian Foreign Ministry, the journalists and the civil society, I think for many of them, one of the key things is that you have to keep on talking about it, keep transferring the message. So I think from the Lithuanian perspective, obviously we understand that the Ukrainians have to have the voice and have to be the voice that is the most audible. But on the other hand, I think Ukrainians also need some of the support, some of the voices, additional voices within the European Union, within NATO, and here the Baltic countries come in. Obviously, we can say that it's really nice to see how the Lithuanians are collecting money to get a drone or sort of the winter kit or anything of that. But I think in terms of the scale, it would be just too little. So I think in looking at the media and the politicians, the main thing is doing the PR. So I don't know if the Ukrainians always appreciate it, but I think this is what most of the Lithuanians are concerned and what they see as their role. When it comes to sort of the way it's seen in Poland and the way it's seen in Lithuania, I think Lithuania and the other Baltic states are in an easier position to an extent that on the one hand, there's no history, the shared history between Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, and Ukraine is a bit different. It's a history of colonial history, it's a history of Russian occupation, and then liberation following the fall of the Soviet Union. In Poland, we have different contexts. The history has been more diverse, sometimes even a bit more violent. That's one thing, which makes Lithuanians in a much better position over the Baltic countries. The other thing is that when you come look at the current sort of movements of displaced people from Ukraine, most of them move west, and not many of them come to Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. So for them, this is not a point where you can actually try and play a little game like they do in Poland, trying, some of the far right-wing parties or activists trying to play the card, stop the Ukrainizing the Polish society. This is Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia is more or less free of this. Obviously, there are the minorities, which is an important thing to consider in the case of Estonia and Latvia. But I think, again, the war has been a good moment in a way to clean the political sphere. And if you look at the recent political elections in Latvia, the openly sort of Russian-leaning party, which was always the voice of the minority, has got a really bad result compared to the previous year. So I think the Baltic countries are in a more comfortable situation. And then maybe to finish off, I think one thing that I would like to mention why it's a global war and we should not forget about it. It's also a war of decolonization, sort of end of empires and colonies. I think this is one of the things that we could actually talk about more as Poles, Lithuanians, and even some of the Western European countries who have this experience. France, Germany, maybe are going or have gone through the difficult process. Looking at the United States is also going through the difficult process. But to make this conflict, the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, I think we need to think in these global categories that can really get other people involved and on board. So at the end, I just did what Lithuanians do, just trying to say how to interpret the war.
But I would ask you the same question as Sophia, if you maybe could add, or you support what Sophia said, but from your perspective as a Lithuanian, but also as an analyst, observer, which of the conceptions or narratives going around, whether in Lithuania or in Europe, are the most harmful or are the most suitable for Kremlin goals?
I think I would just repeat what Sofia said when it comes to the global narratives. That's why I probably try to bring in the decolonial perspective, which is also a very important one. When it comes to the Russians, non-Russians, the Putin regime, I think it's not really that much of a case in Lithuania. But one thing that I would say, when you look at the narratives in Lithuania, I think, and the Baltic states, there's a good service tracking those narratives. I think there's not really that much of a risk. I think when you look at trying sort of to blame the energy prices on the West, trying to sort of take away the blame from Putin and so on. None of these things are actually working. So I think, again, the Baltic countries are in a fairly comfortable position to actually avoid this. Whereas on a global scale, I would totally agree with Sophia, what she said about the Russians and not being responsible for anything and trying to divide guilt and responsibility, that, the Russians are not guilty, but they're responsible and so on, playing these intellectual games, trying to draw away the attention, maybe draw away the attention from the current aggression and focusing on these very theoretical transitional justice issues. Who is there and what's the blame and what's the responsibility?
Thank you. So maybe I will, I'm sorry, Agnieszka Legutska, an expert in
analysis. I was late, so you can blame me.
I will leave you for the last but not least position. And so maybe if I could, Ian Philippe Albrecht, come to you with actually almost the same question. But first, is, as far as Germany is concerned, right now you are not in a comfortable position, as using the Laurina's concept. Germany is, I think, one of the most criticized within Europe countries for the way it has answered or handled the crisis, the war. So, from your perspective, as also being a member of a part of Germany that is more supporting Ukraine, what is the most influential factor as far as Germany's hesitance, I don't know how to call it, is concerned? What is the most influential factor as far as Germany's government's position so far is concerned?
I think that a very important factor for the way how this government is addressing the whole situation from the beginning of the war is the task to readjust a lot of positions in light of the mistakes of the recent years. which now became visible for everyone. It was visible, the mistakes were visible for a lot of people already before, but not for everyone. People really in Germany tried to not address it or to not see it. There was a misunderstanding, maybe also an active blind spot on the question of security concerns being raised by Eastern Europeans, especially by Ukraine, which have been, with a lot of the political actors, seen as being over-exaggerated, even after the invasion of Crimea, after 2014. This was very present in Germany. So now it's a very important factor how quickly and how openly political players in Germany can justify or readjust their positions in a new way and agree on actions. And I think maybe I can add that I think the critical voices vis-à-vis Germany have therefore maybe also different reasons. One is these mistakes and misunderstandings, which now become very problematic as Germany has such a central position and dependency in the energy sector on the one side, and on the other side by allowing the weapons being produced and delivered, because many of the heavy weapons are produced in Germany, and there's a necessity to agree on exports and so on. But also I think that secondly there is the point that there are high expectations and high also a high moral level vis-à-vis Germany, and have been before, and you can more easily be disappointed if you have high expectations, rather if there haven't been any high expectations. And that's, I think, also a point vis-à-vis Germany, why there is such a critical situation. Last but not least, maybe also because Germans never really have seen Ukraine so much as Russia. In many regards, and haven't really fully grasped that it's two different.
Sorry, I don't know. Sorry.
It's two different players with two different.
This is not the end.
No problem. It's two different players with two different views on the landscape, and that Ukraine also was very much in the focus of Germans, German wars before, and not only Russia and so on. So there is a historical misunderstanding also as a source to the different debates which Germany now has to go through, and that is also affecting, of course, the government coalition.
Yeah, that's what I actually wanted to ask. What is making this switching or moving position the most so difficult? Is it kind of psychological? Is that it's difficult to admit to mistakes? Is it the networking issue that Russian also German relations has been networked for so many years or decades? Is it, I don't know, economy, security, or people's perception? What is making it
it's
so
exactly
difficult?
all of it. And that's the heavy part. You can't just blame it on one of the points. It's really all of it. And that's why this all has grown also towards this situation and been so complicated to like deconstruct all of it at the same time. I can only say, like, I've been 10 years ago, so that was even before Crimea, to an informal ministry council in Riga as a parliamentarian of the European Parliament. I've been joining that meeting, and it was what I'm telling is not about this meeting, but in that time I was just walking around to the harbor and seeing the LNG terminal, and realizing in this whole debate that there has been also economic dependencies and also discussions about the economic dependencies inside the European Union, which haven't been fully discussed, especially not in Germany. And that shows that, of course, it's not only perception and psychology and networks, but it's also economic interest, yes, which have played a very important role and which still play an important role when we talk about how to address authoritarian regimes. We will have the same debates coming up with China now. We will have the same debates with the post-Putin regime, maybe. We will have the same debates everywhere, and we have to discuss it now in a more honest way on a European level, and we can't just ignore that there is very different views and perspectives, and that the Eastern European perspective maybe has not played an important enough role in these economic debates in Europe.
So the same question to you would be, again, what is from your perspective the most harmful perception or concept or narrative going around Germany or Europe right now?
I would agree to the point that one of the most important points to talk about the narratives is to talk with the people having a view on it from a directly affected position. And that is that, for example, in Germany and also other Western European countries, we need to have more debates with people from Ukraine, for example, on their views and on their critical views on certain narratives, like those have been mentioned here. And I think that the narrative question is not only linked to the sole situation of this war, but it's a more general question of narratives which are around, which have now to be questioned on the moment of this war. But there is a bigger task to it, and that is addressing maybe wrong narratives which have been there in many European states and countries for over a long time.
Can you give an example?
For example, the narrative that the dependency towards some players, like towards Russia, may be solved by networking, as you said, or by only economic means. And that's, of course, a narrative which has been there a long time, even before, and has not only have an impact on, or has not only like evolved on the question of Nord Stream 2, yes or no, but there are still many of relations and many questions coming up, also a part of all this, which we will have to debate right now in a new way, and maybe discuss about also the question, what are the value partners in the world we are having, and what are those not, and what is the effect then on a European economic policy inside, but also outside, importantly outside of Europe. So we have to rediscuss that in a more broader and fundamental way.
Thank you. So free trade is not solving all our problems around the world, I would say.
I mean, yeah, that's another narrative may I get into it, because yes, there was a mistake that we were addressing things with free trade agreements and blending out a lot of other things, but there's also a narrative from a more progressive lefty side that free trade agreements are of the evil and we shouldn't do it. Both of it is wrong, you know, so we need them because it's sometimes the only way how we can get multilateral and international rules, but we have to make sure that values and democracy and rule of law are the basis of it. And if you don't go into that value distinction, yeah, then of course, yes, you have to also limit your economic partnerships if it's not working up to that.
Thank you. And Agnieszka Legutska, I guess you have the most difficult task as an analyst, I would say, because I would like to ask you about Russia. So you have to kind of draw for us a picture from Russia. So maybe directly right now, after Russia's goals and narratives have been changing, because of their failures on the front lines. So right now, what is, you think, the message that Russia would like to project, Russia would like to project around Europe to fulfill their current goals and needs?
Okay. Thank you very much for the invitation, and sorry for being late. I was on the different debate. So during the pandemic, it was easier because we were switching the Zoom, and it was easier. Nowadays, we have to run. But saying that, yes, I'm dealing with Russia, and it's not easy, and I also dealing with propaganda and disinformation. It would be easier if I would have something to to draw, but definitely after this new invasion, Russia have more difficult task how to influence our sphere of information, because European Union has blocked very good thing because it blocked RT and Sputnik, because it is not the proper journalists, and we know that. So it was a good move, but actually Russia is elaborating a new way of how to influence our democracy. So I will not make a big statements about how it was before. But after the new invasion, and one statement, what I see the big problem from the bottom line for us, to frame this war as a Ukrainian crisis. Because it's not the Ukrainian crisis, right? It is the invasion, it's war. If we can call it a Russian crisis, I would agree from the different levels. Also, as it was mentioned, it's not the Putin's war, but so it's not the Ukrainian crisis from the first narrative that Russia is trying to also to push our minds. So if I can draw if I would have something to draw, so the basic thing for the Russian propaganda is that the Ukraine is not the country, and Ukrainian is not the nation. So saying that Russian propaganda is usually framed for the internal society after the invasion, is trying to actually not to mobilize society. On the contrary, is trying to demobilize society, saying that the authorities, exactly Putin, is having everything under the control, and that Russia is supposed to stay at home, not to be involved into the politics. I can elaborate it more, but I don't want to take your time. So
this is cynicism.
Yes, something that not to be involved into the politics. That Russia is not supposed to be involved into politics, go to the streets, go to the demonstration, etc. Saying that Ukraine is not the country and Ukrainians are not the nations, it helps to dehumanize Ukrainians, saying that they are. Sorry for saying that, because it's quoting, right? It's propaganda. Ukropy, chachly, to say that they are not humans. And of course, Nazis, they are using these great patriotic war symbols, because it's something that Russian propaganda is using very, very often, because it's the most important event in the Russian society. 75% of Russian society saying that is the most important event in their history. So it's Nazis, it's Banderovцы, but the Nazis is the most important element of on the symbols in Russian society. Saying in the global arena and in the West, the narrative is saying that it's in Ukraine actually they are Americans, actually, NATO, are trying to create anti-Russia by Ukrainian language and etc. Anti-Russia, so it's a threat for the Ukrainian people. Saying that the basic thing, the fundamentals of this propaganda, and this is not also the message for the Russian society, that they are not fighting with the Ukrainian army, and also they are not blaming Russian army because of the defeats. So they are fighting with Americans. They are fighting with NATO army, the foreign fighters there, because they are not feeling equally to Ukraine, right? Ukraine is not the equal rival. So that's why they are framing with the narratives that actually in Ukraine, Ukrainian army is having a support from Americans or from the NATO countries. Or Poles that are fighting there. Germans are rarely mentioned, but their Brits are mentioned there, and Poles. But in the world, the narratives is that if the Ukraine is not the full country, is failed country, actually, in the global south, actually, Russia is winning the narrative, that it's not the Ukrainian-Russia war, it's the America-Russia war. Or in the different story, you can find that it's a civilization clash, or the proxy war, American proxy war. And here you can find different story, that if it is a American proxy war, then you can find all the Mansheimer story, that America is having its own alliances, or puppets, like Poles are puppets, American puppets here, or Europeans are American puppets here. So actually, here, Russians are winning sometimes those narratives here in Europe, including France, some audiences in those parts of European societies who are anti-Americans. So actually, Russian propaganda are winning those hearts who are anti-Europeans, anti-Americans, not really pro-Russians, but Russian propaganda success is usually there, and Putin is not convincing for Putin agenda, but usually for anti-someone. And here, Ukraine is framed as not being Ukraine, but actually America interest. So America is involved in Ukraine not because Ukrainians are fighting for freedom, are fighting for their land, but because America is having some interest there. Energy interest, some different kind of interest. And that helps in many countries, not actually in Europe, in broader perspective, because when you can see the opinion polls, you can see that most of the European Union citizens their hearts are pro-Ukrainians, but when you can observe African societies who are not having such, let's say, access to the different sources, Ukrainian sources, for example, but they have access to Russian sources because it's easier to access. They have, and they are anti-colonial, have the stereotypes. They have anti-colonial stereotypes, anti-American stereotypes, and etc. Then they are not pro-Ukrainians. You can look at the Latin America agenda, and you can also see the bubble. And this bubble is not also pro-Ukrainians. So my point is that Russia is using that kind of narratives, which is, anti-Americans, anti-Europeans. But to the future, and this is my last point, because I can give you so many different and dangerous stories about these narratives, but I will say about one. Because we will have an energy crisis, and we already have. So the biggest, the threat narrative in coming months will be that the problem of coming energy crisis during this winter will be that the basic for this is the war in Ukraine. Why it is a threat narrative? Because if the message will be that the war is the basic thing for our energy crisis, so the societies will say, let's stop the war, right? How to stop the war? Let's make Ukrainians give up something, right? They can do let's do something like this. Let's give up let's make some...
Let's concede.
Yes, concede, do something about it, right? Because, Putin has a nukes or something, and this is I think the message can be wrongly transmitted to the European societies.
Sophia, I know you want to add something, but I will give you the question, and maybe you can combine it. I feel a bit uncomfortable actually asking you that. But I think I should try, because I wanted to ask you about Russia. From the perspective that I think that many people
Would you like
just want also Ukrainians as well, but in Europe, I think even more want it to be over with all the problems. So everybody is trying to predict what will happen. And predicting is also influencing the perceptions of right now. So what will happen, when will it happen, how will the war end, will Ukraine have to give up the lands or not? All these speculations that are going around. So do you perceive them also as harmful? And how you as Ukrainian or how in Ukraine you talk about the future?
I mean, it's of course it's hard to talk about the future if my planning is really short-term planning, having the missiles flying every day. But in a way, what's essential? The war will be over when Russia will leave the territories of Ukraine. That's what should be learned by heart, and this is only condition when this war will be over, when we will return to the borders of 1991. This is the state of Ukraine that should exist, and any other speculations, and no concessions. That's essential, because just imagine it can be anyway in Germany or in Poland that one day Russia says hey, listen, we take part of your territory, give up on this. How comes? And this is. First of all, and this is one of the probably also the dangerous narratives, which there are also some two other dangerous narratives flying around that speculate that the solution to end all the problems in the EU or in the global scale will be to stop the war. No, because as Zelensky in his recent interview to CDF, he mentioned don't be tempted about the brotherly embrace. We had this sort of a brotherly embrace. This is what everyone is saying, that these are two brothers fighting. No, this is not the case. And this is we know that brotherly embrace of Russia is quite suffocating, and it could be perceived through culture, about actually this colonization, as Laurinas is mentioning, the brotherly embrace may be quite tempting now. I mean, this is what Putin recently is mentioning. Let's start negotiations. Let's have a peace talk. But everyone knows that. He says, let's have a peace talk. In the meantime, we have 46, 50 drones flying and attacking, and every day we have shellings. So in a way, he talks about, I'm a good boy. I mean, I'm offering a table for negotiations. At the same time, he's launching missiles, drones, all the types of arms daily. And this is quite tempting. So in the West, it might be considered but Russia is ready to negotiate. But let's not forget that daily people are dying while he says, let's talk. And this is like this brotherly embrace, brotherly invitation to the table is very dangerous. And we should not like say like, hey, like this is, because this is what I've started observing. And also, I mean, something what I like, it's not comfortable to mention, Elon Musk. I mean, we're checking with his like peacekeeping scenarios, as we saw a couple of days or a week ago, like this, how the war should end. And this is when you follow pro-Russian media or experts, they will say, Ukraine is not ready to negotiate. Listen, like Putin invites for the debate, for negotiations to end the war, but yeah, let's put it like, let's see it in the real eyes, like how it is, like with all the missiles and the fights happening and people dying every day. We had like, 2014, 2015, 2016, the war, 8 years, there was a Minsk agreement. The war didn't end, like there was a promise that there will be a ceasefire, but the war was continuing. And now, after 8 years, it just got a new scale, a new effect on everyone.
What I even mean more, I think, I'm really curious how you personally look at it. I watched President Zelensky's interview to BBC, and at one of the last parts, there was this question. I think most of the people in the European Union are asking themselves, what will happen in Russia? What will happen to Putin? We already understand that Ukraine will somehow win. We don't know how much it will cost, but everybody is now thinking what will be with the Russian Federation, what will be with Putin. And this is the speculation that is going around. I'm personally a little bit afraid of it because I think it's also framing our understanding of the processes. And the answer of President Zelensky was like, he said, "Всё равно, I don't care." Is it, but is it really that you don't think about it?
Like, I think about that the Putin should, like, literally, I don't care what happens to him, but the main idea, like, he has to be prosecuted. I mean, like, this is now even more discussed, the issue of tribunal. Like, he should be accountable. All the system has to be accountable. And also to recognize the guilt, and also because the main idea, we might prosecute and put under the tribunal Putin. But as a state, we have to avoid that in the next narratives, like in Russia, it will be forgotten that they invaded Ukraine. That was their guilt, and this guilt has to be recognized. The responsibility should be taken and not just forgotten, because this is massive crimes that we observe now, and this is the biggest war happening since the World War II. And I mean, this recognition of the crimes, admittance of the crimes should take place. This is essential, and this is what I see as a must, and also like the tribunal for the Putin and all engaged in the process. Because for us, you cannot depersonalize. For us, it's very, like, you feel what's happening on the territory, that could happen to anyone sitting in the room if you would be based in Kyiv and you were, not Kyiv, in Ukraine, and you were unlucky. And that's essential. Like, those who committed the crimes should be in charge of them, and they should be accountable for them, and that's essential. If there is opposition, feel free, be vocal, speak against this. And I mean, I would love to see that there is like a new Russia at some point, that the people will rise up. But will it happen? I don't know. I cannot predict this, because we can wish from Russia all the best, but we see the reality that it's killing all Ukrainians around.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, if you allow me, finish the round of the questions for our guests. But if you will have any questions or any opinions you would like to share, I will try to make the last round for you. So please keep them in your heads, and you will have the possibility to ask them to our guests. So maybe, Laurina, to you the question will be, first, what has February of this year changed as far as Lithuania is concerned? This is the past. And the future, the same question to you as to Sofia. How do you perceive the debates about the future, especially about the future of Russia?
Okay, so to answer your first question, I'll just quote the Lithuanian Prime Minister who was here at the Warsaw Security Forum 2 weeks ago or a week ago, and she said, Nothing has changed after the 24th of February. Nothing has changed. I mean, the only thing that could have changed is that it's convinced our Western partners that Russia is evil, because prior to that, apparently people didn't notice it. So I think it's also the case for Poland that the understanding how evil Russia was always there, but it's only giving more credibility to the voice of Central and Eastern Europe, to whatever we say. So I think this is one of the positive things.
Do you think that what also Jan-Philipp Alberto was saying, do you think that the voice of the region, let's put it this way, is being heard better in the whole of European Union?
I think for now, and obviously you can all go nitpicking, and there are some things that we would like to be done in a way far more radical than some of the people in Italy or in France would like to have things done, or even in the Benelux countries. But I think in general there is a feeling, and I think it's a feeling also looking at the German partners and many other partners, that there is a willingness to listen. So I think, I don't know how Agnieszka sees it as a representative of a think tank, but I think there's a greater appreciation of whatever we say than that was there before. So that's one thing. Obviously, to be absolutely serious, many things have changed. Ukrainians are dying. We need as much arms, and we need as much financial support as well for Ukraine. It's not only about arms. So that's one thing. But in general, I think it's only strengthen and fortify the voice of Central Europe, and especially I would leave the Visegrad countries maybe on the side. I would just say that Poland and the Baltic states are really enjoying sort of a slight raise in reputation. I mean, Poland still has many good things to do, and I think I could sort of maybe go into it, seeing that Poland's current politics maybe is destroying a bit of European unity without any maybe with having good intentions, but it's not working for the benefit. But in general, to sum up and answer your question, I think these voices are heard much more, despite all the sins that they could have had before.
And the narratives, the perceptions of the future, I don't know, I don't want to say especially Russia, because I also think that Russia is all the empires hijacking our imagination and our attention. But on the other hand, it is happening, so...
Jan-Philipp was saying that we have to look far into the future, and I think I remember my colleagues here at the Visegrad Inside were doing some of the scenarios for the future, and I was before the pandemic, before the war, and I was saying, okay, why do we have to do these liberal things? Why do we have to tone everything down? Why can't we say there'll be a pandemic? Why can't we say this? No, but the risk, the probability is so low, it doesn't make any sense. Come on, can't we say there will be a big war? No, it doesn't make sense. You know, we all sort of liberal, rational, and so on. That's also part of Putin's narrative, that he's rational in some sort of way. Maybe he's rational calculating, but there's been many miscalculations. So I'll take this, what Jan-Philipp was saying, that maybe we should look into the future and be a bit more imaginative and brave, and say, you know, today walking here, I said, I'll stop calling the Russians Ruskis, because this is their old name for the Ruthenians, for the Ukrainians. Why do we even have to bother about Russia? Just call it Muscovy and a few other regions around it. So why don't we just start thinking about Russia as something very temporary? We have Russia for the past, 30 years. It's just like any country, just like Lithuania. Before that, there was some sort of a bad empire. Before that, there was empire, another bad empire. And didn't even exist before 21? So why don't we just try to shift the way of thinking? We see it as permanent. How come Germany could accept being, not existing before 1871, then existing, then being a Nazi Germany, then being as two Germanys, now being as back two Germanys again, with a bit of, emotional sentiment to Western Czech Republic and Western Poland? Why can't we talk about this? Why can't we use these narratives when we talk about Russia? So I think this is one of the things that we should actually be brave talking about. And I think it's also to say a positive thing about Germany. When we look at, I started my work at the College of Eastern Europe. We started our first projects with Germany in 2015 and so on. I mean, the number of Ukrainian experts was zero 0.5. So now, finally, we can actually invite people who are experts on Ukraine. So I think it's a big success, and I think thanks to the Polish-German Foundation for Polish-German Cooperation, the Heinrich Böll Stiftung here again, because we can see how things are changing. They take some time, but we just have to look into the future. And one of the things is the narrative. So I think the topic of this roundtable, this discussion is narratives. I think they can be a lot when we talk about energy, because I think energy or the agriculture is another thing. Oh, but this is not real, you know. To build a pipe, you need 5 years, and it's not really an easy way of talking about it. But now you mentioned, you know, the LNG plant in Riga 10 years ago that you saw, that it's already there. So I think we need to be, allow ourselves to say a few silly things with the hope that at least 20% of it works out.
Thank you. Jan Philip Albrecht, you talked about future a bit from the more European Union perspective, but if we are talking about global, we were talking here, this is, I think, also important. But what else would you add as far as how we talk about the future? What do we kind of learn from the experience, Ukraine, especially Ukrainians' experience of the war? What should we talk about conclusions as well from that war? I don't want to say so that the war does not happen again, because I think it's one of the silliest things we have been saying in Europe after Second World War. It's been ridiculed. It's so frustrating. So, yeah, what would you name?
I mean, regard the latter what you just said, I think that the misunderstanding was often that not having another war was very often perceived with the eyes of just like, how should we integrate so that we don't go to war anymore? But there was a second part to it, and that, of course, we were building up an international community, and we were building up rules how to safeguard peace in the world, also in an active way, and that no one can stand by when wars happen, because wars happen, and they will happen, and we have to deal with it in a regulated way. And that's why now also we are not only talking about a war, we are also talking about the defense of the international community and the rules we have built up since those big wars, and to make sure that we mean what we have created. And that brings me to a point which may sound silly in a way, because it's silly to say that the good thing of the pandemic that we all learned how to work digital and so on. And of course there is no good thing about the pandemic. So I don't want to talk about the good thing of the war, but there is of course this moment of the war which brings us to the point that we are talking to each other about it, and that we are talking about with each other about it, and that we are talking in a more binding way as Europeans about how do we want to live together in light of those threats, and in light of players like Russia and Putin and others around, and how do we also assure ourselves about our common basis of values, of our European values also. And I think that's happening right now. And that's a very positive thing. And we just need to hold on to it, because we all know that the things are not over when Putin is gone. The things are not over when the war is maybe over because we got the Russians out of Ukraine. There will be work to be done. And that includes, by the way, also the reconstruction of Ukraine. And I think it's not only about putting Putin into jail, or at least putting some verdict on him, but it's also about making clear that there has to be someone paying for the rebuilding of Ukraine, you know, and that leads to following up questions.
That's what I wanted to come back to you, to Sofia also. How much are you personally, I don't know, or as a nation, afraid that, or maybe other way, how you are safeguarding or trying to fight that people, Europe will not forget about the economical, financial, and the other kinds of support for your reconstruction once the conflict is over?
I mean, we talk about reconstruction already now, and this is essential because we can, of course, postpone it to very late moments, saying like, when's the war over, then let's talk about reconstruction. No, we talk about it already now, and this is in July. There was Lugano conference where this memorandum and suggestion of what the projects and what the scale of reconstruction should look like. And the essential is, I mean, like, I think in a way there is this, everyone is a diplomat at the moment. So everyone is mentioning about this, like in any sphere that we work, should it be agriculture, should it be food security, energy security, culture. This is where people have tried to mention that this is costly war. It has a cost, and we have like the sooner it ends, I mean, it would cost us less. And also in a way what we talk at the moment is that we already now, I mean, it's 8 months of the war, and we talk what we have to rebuild. And this is also, for example, German Marshall Fund. Their assessment is the cost of rebuilding is like $300 billion that it will cost us to rebuild this. I mean, other assessments relate to some 90 billion, but still the scale, the cost is immense, I mean, that we can't imagine. And this is not a matter of a few days or weeks to rebuild. It's the whole cities quite often. It's like, I have the recent data, and the World Bank report says out of the damages, out of the scale that of the damages that are taking place, 40% are civilian infrastructure, the housing, and those people will have to survive this winter. While we are thinking at the moment, and I'm not diminishing it in a way, whether there will be heating or we will have to bear 18 degrees at home. Some people in Kyiv, Chernihiv region, in Kharkiv, in liberated territories, they don't have a roof to survive. And this is where the reconstruction should take place even now, wherever it's safe. And we also have, like, these houses, they have to be rebuilt, the institutions, the schools, because if there are no schools, kids are not returning to these territories. And this is what we have to mention to our governments, to the politicians, to political parties, to ensure that this coalition of support of Ukraine is widespread. It's not one single person or just the President Zelensky giving interviews or updates every evening in his daily recordings. It's all of us who are talking, and also it's all the EU citizens and beyond the EU, that you talk about this with your politicians, that you raise. This is your taxpayers' money that will go for this reconstruction in the end.
Do you think that, from your perspective, the voices, because I'm saying Ukraine nation, but it's everywhere, there are different perceptions and different interests. Do you think that since you are already talking about how to rebuild, so how to build the country, all the voices that should be heard within Ukraine are being heard, can be during the conflict? Is it a problem then? What I mean, you have different... in Ukraine, you probably have different opinions, different interests. So do you think it is a problem during the war to discuss how to rebuild Ukraine, how to do it?
I mean, we started discussing the rebuilding in July, which was like, what, 4 months? I mean, this is crazy. Let's be honest, that we are ready, that the government, but it's also that the civil society is discussing this. And this is what's essential, that we have to mention, that in any kind of a reconstruction process, we have to engage the civil society and independent experts. So to ensure this accountability of funding, of what the projects are, whether they are in a sustainable way, but also consultations with the local citizens on the local level. So that should be a multi-level process and participatory as much as is possible. And I believe it, in a way, even in a wartime context, this participation is possible, because why this kind of a resistance in the very first months was efficient? Because of a decentralization reform, because it was local authorities and local level who were in charge of their security, and they knew which resources, how to mobilize their communities. And this is what we have to keep in mind now. A, that we engage civil society in reconstruction process. B, that we have to listen to the local voices on the local ground, and also as much as possible to use the benefits of this decentralization reform in the end. And this is also like if you want to rebuild and you want to do something for Ukraine, come not only to Kyiv, but come to small towns and talk to the people and local authorities there, because it's totally different perspective, and it's what you can understand and what's happening in the real life and what's the situation out there. And this is what I would most likely would welcome, that if you go to Ukraine, go beyond Kyiv, go to different places and see the real picture there.
That's what I think Andres Aslund said, that all the intellectuals and experts should be going to Ukraine now.
Yeah.
Even though it may sound a bit dangerous, but if you want to understand. So the last question will be to Agnieszka Legucka. From your personal, as an expert perspective, but also as somebody who understands better than us the mechanisms within Russia, which narratives, perceptions of the future or of right now are the most harmful to Kremlin, or which Kremlin is most afraid of? Which are the most effective then?
I mean, maybe I will start a bit differently, because from my perspective, now is the most important and dangerous moment for Putin elite when it comes to war in Ukraine, because now Putin is in the tipping point moment when it comes to war, because in the long-term perspective, Russia is losing when it comes to when it's comparing to the West. Putin's decision about partly mobilization, which is not partly mobilization, it's full-time mobilization, because it's, I don't know if you are following this process, but it's taking, at the beginning, they were taking men from the regions, from the Far East and the Caucasus, but now they are actually moving to the big cities. They are bringing people, they are catching men in buildings, in factories.
I also heard about the student from St. Petersburg that was being
yes,
mobilized.
he was like running from policemen, but they captured him. It's really damaging Russian economy very heavily. So it's a matter of time when Russian economy, not only because of sanctions, which will be very harmful from 2020, I mean next year, because of the oil and etc., but actually Russian economy will be very heated by all those elements when it comes to the labor force. And it's a crucial moment for Russian regime, but we also know that Russian people will not go for the full demonstration. They are not the society that will be going on the streets. They prefer to go outside, and they are escaping Russia, which is also very helpful for the market, etc. But my point is that now we are facing the moment that Putin will escalate situation in Ukraine. That's why the new tactics of how he's trying to scare Ukrainian society, but Putin do not understand Ukrainians, and this is the biggest mistake of this regime, because Ukrainians are not Russians. And what you said at the beginning, the emotions of Ukrainians is the anger. But Russians do not feel anger when they have force against them. And this is something totally different when it comes to the emotions that they feel after that kind of actions. So it doesn't even the matter of narratives, because propaganda was working very successfully when it comes to Russian society since 2014 at least. But the matter is of elite of Russia in Russia, how they will calculate the situation in the near future around Putin. So that's why we will face in the near months escalating the blackmails about the nuclear threat, about critical infrastructure. This is the point why we were observing the Russian attack over Nord Stream 2, over Nord Stream 1, which was the message that we have to elaborate all our energy infrastructure, even more dangerous for us than nuclear threat, which will be used in the end of the day of Putin's decision. Because we can discuss it maybe later. This will be the last decision when probability of that kind of decision will be very little. But we, and I think this should be very highlighted, we are facing nowadays a very escalatory moment when it comes to narratives, the chantage elements, because this is that kind of narratives, that kind of blackmailing we will face in the near future, because that kind of, let's say, strategy is working when Russia is losing on the ground. It's working like this. A threat, a fear is always something, a weapon, when Russia is weak on the ground. And the last sentence, Ukrainians are better in reading that kind of strategy. The West is learning it quicker, slower, but it's learning. This is the learned lesson from Ukraine war with Russia.
Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions you would like to ask, I know there will be... Yes, yes. No. Teraz, proszę bardzo. Tutaj jest mikrofon. O, już dla pana.
Yes, there is a microphone for you, sir.
Już włączam.
Let me help you with this.
Raz, dwa, trzy. Chyba jest dobrze.
Okay, I think it's working. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Please, if you will allow me, I will speak Polish. I'm really happy whenever I can come to Poland, and it's very rare that I visit Poland, so I would like to take this opportunity to speak Polish. I would like to say a word of comment. I've been asked to present my comments. Maybe I will do it now. I would like to focus on the German situation. In this decisive moment, the German position is not very clear. Every narrative or every interpretation that says that we are dealing with a unified coalition in Germany is absurd. This is not true. There are all sorts of different signals that we hear from our politicians. This applies to the legislative and the executive powers. Of course, as the executive power is concerned, we are talking about a three-party coalition. My main focus is on the Green Party, and on the Green side, whether it's Jan Philipp Albrecht or his other colleagues, the position is very clear, and it says that we need to support Ukraine in many different forms, through arms, but also other strategies. We have to support them. This is our responsibility. So the war has been going on for many months now, and I have observed an important gap in Germany. We are talking about a so-called Zeitenwende, so it's a sort of shift of time, so change. And for Germany, as this huge country, it can be compared to a large ship. And it takes time to change course. We are observing a new situation, a new level of escalation, and right now, both the German side and the Polish side, preferably together, in these coming days and weeks and months, we should work together. We know that there have been problems, and we know what they have been, political problems, not only in terms of the different narratives that are being used by both sides, but also some more substantial problems. There was a chance for those in Germany who are in favor of a very hard stance to Russia, and the Polish groups that believe the same should work together. And I think this would be very valuable if we cooperated. I think it is also important, and I see it as my obligation to introduce you to this book. I'm not the author. The Zelensky, for me, is the best example of a person who can change history. He started as an actor, and now he's an international hero. He's been confronted with an absolutely new, challenging situation, and within just a few months, he has been able to change completely. It's like a miracle to me. A Polish patriot, a Pole, but also a European, also covered a similar path, we could say. It was a long path or long road, we could even say. He was also a person challenged by a new situation, by opposition, also from his own circles, people who are not prepared to fight, and they said, well, we have to concede, we have to negotiate, we can't rely on help from the West. But he said, no, our only chance is to fight, but to do so in a rational way. So not in a romantic sense, but we have to be calculating. I'm talking about the 1930s. I would also like to mention Winston Churchill. Without him, the history would have taken a completely different course. De Gaulle, also a realist. But right now, we don't have Winston Churchills, we don't have de Gaulle's, we don't have Piłsudski's, the person I was talking about first. But it is important to bear in mind that in Germany, we've had many different times, also from Sikorski. Many people appealed to Germany to take their responsibility seriously, to be responsible for being a leader too. Also, Sikorski appealed to Germany to take their leadership seriously. Is our chancellor going to do it? We don't know, but I believe that we need to be strong. Our politicians, those who hold positions in the political sphere, but also those of us who work in the non-government organizations, we need to be strong and work together so that we can make sure certain decisions are made. So we have to be strong in a clear support for Europe and in consistent fight against not only Putin, really, but against Russia. We need a new strategy for relations with Russia. As Navalny, Kazanov, Khodorkovsky, these are different voices, very different, but they, in a way, they all show me one thing, that Russia can't be stable without Putin. There are some who say without Putin it will be a catastrophe, and I dare to disagree. If Putin continues to be in power, it is going to be a catastrophe. And his survival, I'm not talking about his survival as a person, his political survival is not acceptable. De-imperialization, decolonization, this is the only chance for better future prospects. But it is only going to be possible if we, the Germans, other countries, the Baltic states, enter into a coalition, a new coalition of the willing. And when this coalition will be able to convince other European states that we need an alliance, also a transatlantic alliance in a new way, I know that it is extraordinary, this situation we are dealing with, but I think it's also an opportunity that we should use for a better dialogue between us. Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would you like to add something, or do you have any questions? We have still some time. Excellent. So I suggest that you ask your questions or share your comments, and then we will give our panelists a chance to respond. I've seen 4 people, 6 people in the audience. So please, we don't have that much time, so please keep your questions brief.
It's a pleasure to hear you. I wanted to ask about conservative populism in Europe these days, as for several years we've been observing the rise of populism, conservatism in Europe, and as those parties have been connected to Russia, Marine Le Pen, for example, should we expect any switch in Europe's direction? Should we expect any switch from this conservative direction to more liberal one, or any switch in Europeans' perspective on politics in general?
Thank you. Janusz Onyszkiewicz, Panie Ministrze.
Thank you.
Well, first, a short comment, because we were told that situation in Lithuania hasn't changed on February 25. Well, it did change in Poland, in Polish politics. Unfortunately, it did not change in our internal politics. And unfortunately, it didn't change in our policy towards the European Union and Germany in particular. It didn't change as far as flirtation with some pro-Putin parties in Western Europe are concerned. But what really changed was the change in attitude to Ukraine. Because after all, before February, well, we had very strange relations with Ukraine. We had very sort of, I would say, embarrassing legislation pieces against Ukrainians, and so on and so on. So, and it changed. It changed not only, I think, because of well, sort of some outburst of new sympathy towards Ukraine, but it changed to a great extent because of the reaction of Polish people to what happened in Ukraine. This massive demonstration of sympathy and commitment to Ukrainian case. So this situation in Poland was changed, and well, let's hope that it will stay that way. But now two questions. One question is how to handle the problem of Russians escaping from drafting, being drafted. Well, because there is a certain debate in our region. Should we allow Russians should we grant them visas? Should we sort of refuse giving them visas? That's one question. And the second question is about internal politics in Ukraine. Because after all, before February, there were some tensions. Well, tensions between Zelensky and Poroshenko were quite visible. Now we see, which is rather natural under the circumstances, sort of calm. But is this something rather superficial? Because the problem is that you may win the war, but now then there will be a problem of winning the peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. The narrative, as has been commented, is about the war in third countries is what we would call flabby. Could you identify what you feel would be the long-term narrative for European countries that, for example, countries like Spain, Portugal, Greece, perhaps even Bulgaria, could actually encourage them to take part? The second part of the narrative is this problem of the what you call the global south. I find it quite surprising when I saw the list of names of countries who abstained. Is there a case for promoting much more strongly this anti-colonial narrative, which could be much more effective? I noticed the Ukrainian minister, Prime Minister, already started that and has had some success, but perhaps it should be emphasized by other countries as well, though some countries might have a problem with it. The third question is, and this relates to, we assume that Ukraine will win. We assume that Russia's society will need to be reconstructed. Would something like a Nuremberg tribunal be appropriate for this situation in the same way as it helped Germany come to terms with its past after the Second World War?
Thank you, sir. The lady next to you.
Thank you for a wonderful panel. I have one question for Sofia. I wonder, after the Revolution of Dignity, there have been a lot of reforms in Ukraine. I wonder how they can help during the reconstruction time. And I also have a question for the entire panel. I come from the university in Oslo, Russian studies field, and there is a movement now for opening the field to carry more voices from outside of Russia, also to look at the former Soviet Union and also the Eastern Europe history. And I wonder how you would prefer Western universities to study Russian history or Russian imperial history and also the wider history of the Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, we will take 2 more questions. I know it's many, but we don't have that much time, so I will summarize it later. So I think I've seen, oh yes, there is a, oh, okay, sorry.
Thank you very much for this interesting discussion, and Mrs. Legutska provided a very deep insight into the nature of the state propaganda in Russia, and my question is is there anything at all that can be done, or what should be done more, or what is the most efficient strategy of countering the state propaganda in Russia, but within Russia? In other words, is there any efficient way to reach Russians living in Russia with the real picture of the situation, or maybe they don't want to see the real picture deep inside, or maybe the Russians that are currently fleeing Russia will get out of the range of the state propaganda, and maybe they will deliver the picture to their compatriots in Russia, or or maybe we shouldn't pay attention to it at all because it's hopeless.
And the last one?
Hello. So my question is related to the previous one, like this unifying narrative, let's call it, because, for example, you mentioned Elon Musk, and one of the main founders, in fact, for the satellites was, in fact, Poland, because for them it's a problem of national interest to protect Ukraine. But, for example, France, Europe, Spain, I would say they don't care. They simply it's not so as important for them. And now with coming inflation, there is energy crisis, even more people will lose jobs. Protests and protests will just keep coming and coming and coming. Do we need a narrative to solve that? Do we need the government to step up and fix the economy so people can survive the winter? What would be the best strategy? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Jan Philipp Albrecht, if you could go first. I know you have to go first. And choose the questions. Should I bring them? I think the question to you could be about the long-term narratives for Global South or European Union, or how should Europe or European countries, actually it's interesting, answer to people, Russians running away from the mobilization. Or
yeah, I'm going to take that. It's fine, and maybe I'm going to also start with the question about like the rise of like conservative populism in Europe, which I think is very interesting, and I would like to just say that there is more behind than particular populism by particular parties. I really think that there is not only in light of this war, but also before, a new matrix on how to differentiate the political landscape, and that is mainly between those who are believing in international solutions, believing in common values, and in a clear stand on common values, and those who don't believe in it, and who think in the end that it's mostly about your own interest, especially about economic interest of your certain nation, and that goes across all political parties, by the way. And I think that it's very important to discuss that in today's time, because it's setting the scene for the question: if we get to common understandings, and if we get to common values in multilateral way and solving problems together, or if we don't manage to and get back into conflicts with each other again, with each other again on this particular interest of everyone in this crisis time. And that leads me to the question of how to deal with the European common understanding, but also global common understanding vis-à-vis this conflict. I think that searching for a particular reason why these countries abstain in the General Assembly is also too short-sighted, because we look at this with a very narrow view on this particular war and the situation around, but of course there is a huge complex situation, which is, for example, a very different look on post-colonialism by, on the one side, Western countries and their people, and on the other side, people of the Global South. And we need to talk about these different perspectives. And of course, in the view of the Global South, this war is not seen as a decolonial resistance, but as and a colonial power trying to get into this country, but seen as a fight between two colonial imperial systems like the West and America, as it has been said, and Russia, and that is how Russia wants it to be also, and how it is followed by the Russian propaganda. So we need to deconstruct this whole story which has been already in the global south before the Russian propaganda. But so we need to get into that, and and it is also in Europe. I mean, there's a lot of people saying, yeah, but what about Iraq and what about Yemen, and saying that it would be the complete exactly same thing, which of course is not true, although it's true that the global south reacting in this way is asking for awareness about their situation and not getting it, and that's part of the problem. And although the problem is, of course, that we had a problem in Iraq and we had a problem in Yemen, and we need to address it as Europeans and as the global community with the same urgency as we have to address this war. And I think that those things we need to address on a European and global level, and then I think we will also find solutions to these challenges, which are obviously there.
Thank you so much. If you
Thank
have
you.
to
And
go,
I will have to run,
please. Thank you. So we're really over time. So maybe I will, Sophia, maybe I will leave you, if you allow me to, as the last one, so you can comment on. And Agnieszka Legutska, I guess the best for you question would be especially about countering propaganda within Russia in a minute. Is it possible to answer in a minute? Mm-hmm.
Okay, I can do that. There was a very good statement at the beginning of the war when Ukrainians was searching or looking or needs. They were looking for javelins, and there was a slogan that give the Ukrainians javelins, but to Russians VPNs, and that was the answer how to deal with Russian propaganda. Actually, the only way or the only platform that Russians have in Russia is YouTube nowadays, and the only problem is that Russia do not want to admit, and then they are denying the truth of being in Ukraine, fighting there and killing and raping Ukrainians. When it comes to diaspora, there is a lot of way to deal with independent journalists. There is a TV Rain, Medusa, and in Germany there is a platform Panda, also which connects all the diaspora, Russian diaspora, somehow being quite neutral with the messages, not convincing, not very pushing those.
It's not a propaganda; it's information.
Yeah, more information, but sometimes also bringing them to the messages which we prefer to see and hear. And I would like to answer to Mr. Onyszkiewicz, but maybe we can.
As short as possible.
Yeah, about this visas problem. I think that this cannot be automatically processed, that all Russians who don't want to go to the front line can receive the visa, humanitarian visa, because we, this is the approach of Poland authorities. We cannot be sure that they really are anti-war. They have an anti-war approach, anti-regime, anti-Putin regime. Because I think that for most of the Russians, in that case, the war started on 21st September, when Putin decided to call the party mobilization but not, they didn't felt that the war started 24 of February. This is my very short. I would like to elaborate it maybe later.
Laurinas, I don't know which questions.
I just quickly would like to also answer Mr. Anuszkiewicz, because I would say that nothing changed in Poland on the 24th as well. On the first hand, the governing party has stayed staunchly anti-German for whatever reasons it has, and slightly anti-European. The other thing is, if you look at the civil sort of public opinion surveys from 2019, 2020, the general change in the Polish perceptions of Ukraine have been changing a lot since 2014. Because of the mass migration, the historical narratives that dominated Polish general debate before 2014 have been changing with real life contacts between Ukrainians and the Poles. Maybe the effect is even larger and greater after the war and the blunt and horrible Russian attack, but in general that was there. I would also think, to add to your point, I think one of the points is that we have to have a mixed approach towards humanitarian visas. One of the probably Baltic ways of doing it is let some of it boil over within Russia. So I think leaving some of the people, some of the men there unhappy with mobilization, they just cannon fodder. It can also create some sort of instability within Russia. And then finally, I think there's no doubt that there should be Nuremberg trials for the Russians. Our organization is part of the EU-Russia Civil Society Forum, and there's a partners conference in Vilnius in a month, and somebody suggested a topic, transitional justice in Ukraine. And I said, what the fuck? What is transitional justice in Ukraine? I said what the fuck before when they said that the Russian civil society is being put on the same violence as the Ukrainians. I also said what the fuck, and they wanted to exclude us, but we are the only organization that actually does projects with the Russians, so they couldn't really exclude us for that reason, but I do allow my language to be very crass sometimes.
Thank you. And Sophia, I don't know. Which questions especially? I think what I've noted is especially as far as the reforms for the reconstruction is concerned and internal tensions, political rivalries or whatever.
But I will add up on Russian men fleeing to Ukraine. If you ask me personally as a Ukrainian, I would say, like, guys, go back. I mean, to be honest, like, they are fleeing the responsibility. They are fleeing responsibility, not only personal, but the state responsibility. And we want to invite them saying, yeah, good boys, so you are running away from war. They are not running away from war. They are running of the responsibility of the state. And this is different. I understand the framework of humanitarian law. At the same time, I can say we have Geneva Conventions, which Russia is violating as a hell. But we want to put everyone equal within the humanitarian law. At this point, we put women and children running away from missiles, rape, and tortures, and we want to invite men who didn't do that on their own, but their compatriots and their citizens did this. And I see this, that them fleeing as those running away of this responsibility their compatriots did, not willing to take the guilt and not willing to take the responsibility. Do you think they will take more responsibility being in the EU, in a safe harbor? Do you think they will go out on the streets and protest? I don't think. To be very honest, I don't think and don't believe in this. And speaking about Nuremberg Tribunal, I do think something like this. The tribunal, as I mentioned before, it should take place. Another issue: Russia should pay for the reconstruction and all the damages they did, and they should be the first sponsors of all the costs that we have to cover. I mean, we are very much grateful for all the states that are willing to contribute and to let's say, chip into the reconstruction, but that should be Russia, their assets, their frozen assets, all what their yachts and their crimes, they should pay for the reconstruction, and they should be responsible for what they did. So I do believe there should be a tribunal, and it should be, I mean, in the strongest terms possible, it should take place. Speaking about the reforms in 2014, indeed, like I think that what we have, this resistance and resilience, what makes different 2022 with 2014 is that we have this like active society overall ready to resist and not to give up, and we were like people not being shocked or unprepared. We were in a way, but in a way you see also how people were like mobilizing this volunteering way, like how everyone was ready to respond in a way it is possible. And when we talk about reforms, we do have, first of all, I mean, like, maybe it's also because of my background, but I do believe first and foremost the centralization reform made a big change, and it will make change, and we will feel like how it's essential. We are still reminded like about accountability and transparency of fund spending. I think launching, for example, Prozoro system and procurement systems over the last years and lots of digital solutions, this is a big change. And I think like even right now, like that you literally do the public procurement via systems. This is already one step forward. Another thing, we have the digital transformation happening. I mean, like you have all the documents. You even running away from the war and losing everything. You have the documents in your phone. You can restore them to a big extent, and also you can apply for the damages that you witnessed or you occurred via the app. So we see like, I think there is like we still understand there is some progress in terms of anti-corruption, as finally we got the head of SAP appointed, and there is still more to be done. But I think like over the last 8 years, we cannot get this back. I mean, like it can go only forward, and also I think this like I want to repeat myself. We have a strong civil society that will not allow this to go back. And last but not least, it's my final statement about universities and academia. For many years, we had a lot of Russian studies among different universities, but we had little Ukrainian studies. And I think this is the moment where we can start talking about decolonization. We can talk, research. Yeah, this is excellent. I'm as Ukrainian. I'm following it because it's perfect, and I encourage everyone to.
He has 2 million viewers.
Yeah.
But that's the only
lectures.
course on
Yeah,
Ukrainian
but should be
history.
more, and there should be more like Timothy Schneider, Serhiy Plokhy, and many more. We work with excellent researchers as a foundation, but there should be more, and their voices should be integrated into academia all across the Europe and US, Canada, wherever, because this is where this like basic education and basic step to preventing these kind of wars can take place.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and sorry for being a bit late, but I hope it was worth it. Thank you very much. And please be aware that the next debates, of course, are coming. Thank you.